Hey, ooh, this Hangout on Air is live. Sigmund Bloom here. Matt Waldman with matching hat. Gene Bramall not giving away the secrets. No, he'll take them to his grave. Are you enjoying the Thursday night poop fest? Yes, Richard Sherman contributing his own little turd, I guess, to the poop fest. And, we have a rule. We have a 3-year-old, 6-year-old in our house here. We have a rule like no poop talk. So
Good
Richard
luck with
Sherman
that.
breaking that rule, and Matt, this game breaking that rule is Richard Sherman
Yeah,
prophetic with his Thursday night poop
absolutely
fest.
is. Yeah, I mean it's a sloppy game right now for sure, and we're looking at rookie quarterback play. We're looking at guys who are absolutely just drop passes. Jared Goff with that nice long pass after Kenny
Mike
Britt gets it to
Thomas.
Mike Thomas, and Mike Thomas dropped it. He made some of the most
That one.
incredible catches at Southern Miss, but one of the things that were knocks on him was that he dropped the ball. But I saw that in like a stretch of like 2 games, and then I watched several others where he didn't. He hit him in the bad spot right in the hands.
He got to field it like a punt. He got to like slow down and watch the ball into his hands.
And that's some of the most difficult ones for a rookie who's like overthinking everything. I mean, he didn't get the left hand around, and one bounced right off his fingers. It was just total like quicksand coordination. It was horrible. And we saw, some of that, at points in the game. But Gurley's running better.
Yeah.
Get him out of the eye, and he looks pretty good.
Well, and getting ahead of steam sometimes. And you see his speed. You see that for a man his size, he can motor once he has a chance to get ahead of steam. Not quite winning the collision against Bobby Wagner on a big 4th down. And the teams have moved the ball, but they're just inept. And Johnny Hecker was short on a throw. Just a lot of mistakes, really, typifying this game. Seattle can't feel good about this one either. We go into week 15. Cecil Lammy on assignment. And Sigmund Bloom here. I'll be hosting also next week for week 16. And week 15, I did the Power Grid, the DFS show. A lot of questions. I feel like even though we're 15 weeks into the season, there's a lot of uncertainty about this week. And of course, uncertainty with injuries, Dr. Gene. Let's jump right in. Lots to talk about this week. Top billing, always, it seems now. Julio Jones. And I give you that same 2-part question. What do you think about his chances of playing? And based on what we know now, if he does play, what should be your cue to play him?
This time last week, I wasn't buying it. I'm not buying it this week either. I still have the same concerns I did last Thursday night where, I think our hope was that he would be limited in practice on Friday, be listed as questionable, called a game time decision, and try to play. None of that happened last week. And we were sort of told that, they wanted to test him on Sunday morning and see if he could push off. And there were a few, I don't put a whole lot of stock into pregame warmups on Sunday morning, but when they show video of his pregame warmups and he's doing nothing, he really wasn't given it a chance to go. And Dan Quinn can say all he wants today that they're going to let him push it, quote unquote, tomorrow on Friday and see what happens. But until we actually see them, exactly, salt and pepper, until we see him actually do that and then feel good enough on Saturday and Sunday to go through warm-ups and try to play, I don't think you can trust him. And as we said last week, if he's a full practice on Friday, then you can trust him. If he's a limited practice, then you have a chance. But he's probably not going to see the same number of targets. And if he doesn't practice at all on Friday, I don't know how you can roll with him.
Has anyone told him that Matt Waldman's going to be in attendance at the game? Could that maybe change the outlook if somebody got that message to him?
I don't know. Let's try. Anything can help. I mean, I want to see him play. I'm not rooting for him to not play by any stretch. I know you're not saying that, but it's if last week was pessimistic, this week is pessimistic, and I don't care. Toe sprain versus turf toe. Maybe it's a little bit less severe an injury than what a turf toe injury can sometimes be, but they're still saying the same things. He's got to be able to push off. He's got to be able to return to practice. So I don't really care what he has at this point. We're just waiting to see whether or not he can actually go, and the signs are not good right now.
Gene, I'm just there to see Taylor Gabriel, so that's all I can. Taylor Gabriel.
Don't blink.
Yeah, exactly. So how about Adrian Peterson? How confident are you about his ability to even make an impact in Week 16?
I'm getting more confident, I guess, that it looks like that's kind of what they've been aiming for all along. They want to get him out and do some individual drills this week and make sure that his knee responds well. And if he feels okay, allow him to do more next week. But we're not going to suddenly see a 20 to 25 touch Adrian Peterson in week 16 after not doing anything for 3.5 months. So if he comes back, he's going to be limited situations. I'm not convinced that he's going to be the goal line back over Matt Asiata. Hopefully we get Mike Zimmer to tell us something that gives us an indication of what's going on. But I think, we're in the same situation with Peterson as we were with Julian Edelman last year with the Patriots, which is they'd like to get him back for week 16 and 17, get him acclimated to game action and game speed again, in the hopes that if and when they make the playoffs, they can use him as in any way that they could. But I don't think you're going to get a 40 to 50 snap, 15 to 20 touch Adrian Peterson in week 16, even if he's miraculously active.
So Peterson's coming back from meniscus surgery. Matt Forte has been playing through a torn meniscus. He says it popped and cracked and snapped and whatever last week. This is Saturday night start. Saturday. So at least if you have Bilal Powell, you'll know the inactives. You won't have to wait. But if Forte is active, we're not playing Matt Forte, or you can say, no, really, maybe you should, but should we play Powell?
I think you can probably play Powell. I think that if Forte's active, he's going to play some, but I think we'll see more, in the same way that, we were talking about other running backs over time. I just don't think we are going to see more Powell than we've seen in the past. I don't really know what's going to go on with Forte. They let him talk to the media today. He seemed to be pretty positive about how things were going. He's been on the injury report with a knee issue for years, I think, off and on. And whether it's this meniscus thing, he's had MCL sprains and stuff in the past. He's probably been playing through it already, as he said. Whether or not they knew the extent of it before this week, or they cared to know the extent of it because it wasn't swelling and pain and decreased range of motion is another question. So I think that, I don't know, I would like to see him rest and make sure that he doesn't do any additional damage to that knee. But, like so many of these other players, if he feels healthy enough to go, he's probably going to go. Tomorrow is pretty important for him. He's at least back to a limited practice today. If he can do at least that tomorrow and maybe more, that'll give us some indication of how much he's going to play. But I think very likely a 50-50 split, if not more, in favor of Powell.
Well, Gene, how about Lamar Miller? Ankle and ribs. Seems to have a nice matchup with the Jaguars this weekend. How are you feeling about that? What's
better?
The
yeah, I think, I don't remember if we talked about this on Thursday. I know we talked about it last Sunday morning, where I said, he hasn't really looked like himself. He hasn't got a Lamar Miller number of carries for at least a month. And until we see him able to do that and finish games, then I don't think we feel good about him. And he did that last week. He finished runs. He was consistent from the first quarter to the fourth quarter. He got a good number of carries, and the Texans got so many carries that, it wasn't that Alfred Blue wasn't getting a decent number of touches. It was more of a volume situation. So I liked how Miller looked. I don't necessarily know that the workload split is any more in Miller's favor than it was. I think if you cut 25% off of both of those guys, Miller is still kind of in that 15 to 18 touch range, which is enough for him to do damage if he finishes plays and if he's trusted around the goal line and so on and so forth. So I definitely feel better about him. It's the type of matchup you feel okay using him in. I still don't know that he's got the elite upside, that a Johnson or a Bell or even that's, the Ingram, that sort of second tier running backs has. But I feel better about him now than I did.
So week 15 semifinals, Allen Robinson on your bench, DeAndre Hopkins on your bench, Todd Gurley maybe on your bench. We're watching him tonight. We talked about Julio Jones probably not playing, Adrian Peterson probably not playing. What about AJ Green?
Yes, I think we're going to know, but just trying to read the tea leaves. I thought in the early part of the week that because the Bengals still have a slim chance at the division title and it's the only way they're going to get a playoff spot, they're playing the Steelers, which is a must-win situation, divisional game, and a team ahead of them in the standings, that if they could have any way to get AJ Green on the field, we'd probably see him try to do some things in practice. Knowing that the Bengals tend to bring players back a little bit more slowly, Green and this situation is a little bit different. However, Bob Holtzman has been tweeting almost ad nauseum Wednesday and Thursday about, well, he's not practicing, and the Bengals never, ever, 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 ever play people that don't get back to a full practice on Thursday because the Friday and Saturday practices are glorified walkthroughs and so on and so forth. And every time we've needed information about AJ Green, the most accurate information, the most detailed information has come from Holtzman. And I don't know if Holtzman's got an in with Green himself or somebody close enough to him that there's pretty specific details there. But when there's a diagnosis that's been concerning a return to play that's been up in the air, it's been Holtzman that's given us an indication. So I'm thinking that the Bengals and Green already know that he's not going to play. And they know he's not going to play in arguably the most important game of the season. And they're already doing not damage control necessarily, but why did he have 3 limited practices? How come he's inactive? I think that's the way this is going to go, and he's not going to play. If he does play, he's going to be limited. I just don't see a scenario in which Green doing just a little bit of limited work on their side rehab fields for 3 weeks, then has 3 limited practices where he doesn't do a whole lot, and then comes back and gets anything close to his usual number of snaps and targets. So I still think there's an outside chance he's active despite what we're hearing from Holtzman. You could also argue that it's kind of being built up for he's going to be out there and do the best he can, that we might see a little bit of change in course from Holtzman on Saturday into Sunday. But I do not think we're going to get anything significant from AJ Green, which, we have this conversation on Sunday morning, maybe it leaves us in the same situation we've had with, I always reference Calvin Johnson and Jimmy Graham and so many others. Maybe he's a player that, because they will use him around the red zone, can get 3 to 5 targets and a touchdown and 40 yards, and maybe it's worth the risk. But I'm leaning towards him not playing right now, and I think we're going to get a lot of good information from Friday beyond. Both Julio Jones and AJ Green told reporters in the locker room, no media on Thursday. So I haven't seen, it really isn't a good sign about either one of those guys right now. And hopefully they prove the early trends wrong and they're both playing, but I'm not expecting anything close to their usual production this weekend.
Gene, I saw a picture of your on your post this week of a hand, and it looked like a claw in the middle finger there, and you were talking about Matthew Stafford. So can you talk about the claw hand that's Matthew Stafford's finger right now, and whether it indeed is a claw hand, or I'm just giving the hype for a circus sideshow?
It sounds kind of circusy. We can play some carnival music in the background for you if you like.
I could go with that. You got any carnival music back there?
No, and I don't think anybody wants to hear me sing, even Bloom. So.
Oh, of course I do.
The interesting thing about Stafford, I think, this week is that they fashioned him a glove in which the bottom side of it was open, so his grip isn't changed at all, which I think was probably most of the problem with Stafford's issue in the second half last week, where he just didn't feel comfortable in the glove. And they did so early enough so that he was comfortable enough to fully practice on Wednesday and fully practice on Thursday. We saw some issues with Derek Carr throwing the ball in the cold. I think there could be some inaccuracies with Stafford this week, but he's definitely going to play. He will have had 4 days, counting the walkthrough on Saturday, to get used to what he's going to be able to being asked to throw the ball with, and I think he's going to be okay. There were some concerns when he said he didn't have any control over the tip of his finger. He started to wonder, at least I did, whether it was more of a tendon thing than a ligament issue. And a ligament issue is not a big deal. You have to tear a ligament a little bit to dislocate a joint. That's a bit of another story. But tendon would be a different issue entirely. That would probably be surgical. It would be a situation where he just couldn't bend the tip of his finger at all. That doesn't seem to be the case. So hopefully the swelling's down. The way that they've got this glove put together for him, he'll do just fine. And that seems to be the expectation for Detroit, because more often than not, they will mark players as limited or DNPs if they're not ready to practice. And that's not been the case with Stafford.
Gene, a lot of games with potential weather issues, not so much down in Arizona. That's still not making it that easy to determine what to do with Michael Thomas this week. Return to practice, return to our lineups.
I think. Again, we're not going to get any information out of New Orleans necessarily, but last week it was DNP, and then maybe game time decision, but he was probably never in that category. We still don't know what the specifics of the foot injury is. I mean, is it turf toe? Is it plantar fasciitis? I mean, it could be. We could list 10 or 15 different things that it could be. We just don't know. So it's hard to predict whether or not it's something that could be at high risk of an in-game aggravation or something that he's probably mostly over. I'd feel a whole lot better about him if he fully practiced tomorrow and if he was cleared to talk to the media and said anything about the foot injury at all. But I think we need to prepare ourselves knowing that this is New Orleans for limited practice, not much discussion, and then maybe game time decision with hopefully a Schefter and or Rappaport tweet on Sunday morning that says he's good to go. I think that's as good as we're going to get.
I'm sitting here watching the Seahawks try and counter the Aaron Donald attack here, which is the one-man wrecking crew, and they did a nice little kind of variation of what you might even call a wham block with the offset wing that helped with Rawls get that nice run. But going back to the battered and bruised here, big question about Michael Crabtree. I mean, it seems like that he's been dealing also with another finger issue that he's been. It seems like every game he leaves the sideline for a little bit and has his finger checked on. He wasn't like freaking out like Derek Carr was about his, but he seems to just kind of be quietly going about his business, which includes dropping a lot of passes lately. So are we going to see a healthier Crabtree? What's going on with that hand?
As long as they don't go after Aaron Donald's knees, I'm happy here, I guess. I've seen that a couple of times. I thought we were kind of getting away from that. Chop blocks and otherwise. Crabtree, he doesn't look as comfortable over the past couple of weeks after he's hurt his finger. We've seen it with Sammy Coates. We've seen it with lots of players over the years, wide receivers in particular, where it's just hard to do much with the hands if you've got a knuckle that's jacked up a little bit and still in a lot of pain. The target count really hasn't gone down. He's been a little bit less effective. You hope this is the week where there's been enough interval healing where he's a whole lot closer to himself. But those are the type of injuries that can be aggravated. They don't have to be redislocated necessarily. But players, if it's hit in the wrong spot, he's going to be obviously taking hard passes off the hand. Just hope that he makes it through this game a little bit better than last. It's hard to predict. I think it's another one of the situations we're not going to know until we see it. And we may find out in the first quarter that he looks fine. We may find out in the first quarter that he takes a little bit of a ding and then struggles. But I feel pretty good about him, at least from a target standpoint.
Gene, we got Aaron Rodgers, calf, hamstring, and this is where the weather does factor into an injury analysis. And it's not just when you're going to play Rodgers. Quarterback's pretty brutal this week, but you're looking at guys like Devontae Adams or Ty Montgomery or DFS, Rodgers and Nelson, and so on. How much will it affect Rodgers to be playing in that bitter cold with these injuries? Is there something to the idea that it won't loosen up?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it could affect him quite a bit, and that's part of the reason that he's dealing with these things in the first place. And you wonder if the calf was a cascade situation from the hamstring because he was really never able to get that loosened up last week. However, it really looks like his confidence is back right now, and he's willing to throw any pass at any time and doing so accurately as we've seen him do so often in the past, with the exception of the first few weeks of this year. The offensive line is working a little bit better. They've got, for the most part, all of their receivers healthy. We'll see what happens with Jared Cook this week. The running game, James Starks is probably not going to be available. Christian Michael is missing time with an illness now. They're planning on maybe even giving Ty Montgomery close to 15 carries, but they've been primarily a passing offense since Lacey went out because Starks really hasn't given them much either. The issue with Rodgers is going to be movement in the pocket. He's not going to be a scrambling quarterback at all. If he does, we saw him limp through this time of year and all the way through December and January a couple of years ago with a similar calf type strain. And his passing game wasn't affected. He just wasn't scrambling as much. So that's kind of what I expect to see this weekend. Even though he's not practiced so far this week, I don't have any concern that he's not going to be able to go. And there's going to be some limitations there, but I don't think it's going to be in the passing game.
Well, Gene, it looks like that the Earl Thomas has predicted this game pretty well. 10-3 was the score he said. That's what we got so far, it looks like, if I'm not too far behind. But let's go to an ongoing soap opera we do every week here, which is the Martellus Bennett check. Watching him in Baltimore, obviously had a nice game last week. But from watching him, it looked like whenever he had to try and plant, he would just kind of plant, pivot, and fall down and fall forward as much as he could, or run in a straight line. And Brady would find good matchups for him to be able to target up the seam, and he did very well there. But asking him to actually run after the catch or block somebody other than take some choppy steps and shield them didn't look all that good. So, do you feel from both also who he's facing this week, do you feel like that he should still have more opportunities to run some of these straight line routes and do well? Or is it still more of a, enter at your own risk?
Are you asking me to predict the mind of Bill Belichick? and how they're going to offensive game plan.
Yes.
You're right, because if you watched him, you didn't necessarily notice anything different about how he looked on the field last week in comparison to the weeks prior, but they threw him the ball. So, it's similar to how Antonio Gates looked when he was fighting through plantar fasciitis in both feet a few years ago. Antonio Gonzalez looked at the end of his career. When you've got a player like that who understands how to use leverage in his body, he doesn't have to run after the catch. If he gets 5 catches and they're all in, 8 or 10 yards from the line of scrimmage and around the red zone, maybe this week he's 4 for 50 and a touchdown. Knowing that that's his upside doesn't really give you the warm and fuzzies inside, but at least presents him as a potential option for you. I think we're probably going to find that last week is closer to his ceiling and the less likely side of expectation than the new norm. But it's nice to see that they're at least trusting him out there in routes, both from an offensive line standpoint and from a health standpoint, that they feel like they'll be able to finish his plays. Yeah, Jimmy Graham.
One more round. Sorry, one more round here. Jimmy. I'm 3 seconds behind you, Gene.
Oh, sorry. No, I'm not worried that he's injured here really at all. They took kind of a hard hit on his knee. It's just this kind of recovery at his age from a patellar tendon tear is something else. It's awesome to see.
Yeah, no, it's good, and it changes our ideas of what's possible. And we always like to see that getting more positive. And Jimmy Graham, like he did back in the New Orleans days, getting up and flexing, like, come on, get at me. Like 5 different guys had a shot at him on that play.
I think they're just winning by blinding the opponent right now.
Yeah, exactly. I would call this, by the way, on that note, we'll do one more round with Dr. Gene here. I'll give one more question and then Matt, and then we'll let Dr. Gene go gently into the good night. In New Orleans, everyone knows about the hurricane. You go a little bit further down a tropical aisle to the hand grenade. If you get a hand grenade and only get one hand grenade, you don't need, trust me. When you have 2, it's not going to go well.
I've had a couple of hand grenades back in my 20s.
Yeah, it's the exact
that did not go well. Yeah,
color. It's hand grenade green. Okay, we're gonna feel like we drank too many hand grenades, Gene, if we start Andrew Luck. I mean, again, quarterback's brutal this week. The shoulder. I love how they go like he won't need surgery. Well, I didn't think he was going to need surgery. Wait a second. Minnesota's defense is tough, but every quarterback this week either has a tough matchup or is playing out in the cold or is coming in on a crappy game. So how does this affect, again, for DFS? Or, you might have like you're weighing Luck against, Cousins or Palmer, who knows? What do we think?
Yeah, I'm a little nervous this week. We talked last week that for the first time in a while, he had not practiced on Wednesday, and the kind of line I was taking was we really hadn't seen any limitations from him or any concerns, and they had just come off a Monday night game, so it made sense to limit his reps a little bit earlier in the week than they might have otherwise. This week, elbow and shoulder on the injury report, still not practicing on Wednesday. I don't think there's any sense that he's not going to play or this is on the verge of becoming something more important. And I'm not reading too much into that comment other than somebody was probably asking the question, is he on the verge of having any issues? And that question's probably been something that's been asked multiple times this year. So I'm not too worried about that. But the offensive line is still a mess. And the receivers this week, I don't know that we're going to see Moncrief. Dorsett was added to the injury report with a problem. What did he have? Remember, I look at with a groin injury on Thursday here. So, and Dwayne Allen is dealing with a hip thing. I think he's probably going to play. I don't expect to see Moncrief. Maybe we're going to see Dorsett and Allen, but all those guys are going to be limited. T.Y. Hilton is still banged up. He didn't practice with a kind of a recurring back problem he had. And Andrew Luck didn't really look like himself last week in what really should have been a good matchup. His accuracy wasn't there. His decision-making was a little bit of a concern. And that's what started to bleed into his game last year when he was worried about being hit and if there really is something going on with his shoulder over time. And we're 15 weeks into the year now, and maybe there's finally some fatigue building up on that elbow and that shoulder. I'm not saying don't start Andrew Luck this week. I'm just saying that last week might have been the beginning of a trend of concern for him. And if he doesn't produce as well as we'd like him to, and it's not clearly because the offense is kind of falling apart around him, then I think we need to be a little bit more worried about what might be going on over the final couple of weeks of the season and potentially the offseason too.
So, Gene, looking at one last player here, let's take a look at a player that I know that a contingent of readers have asked about this week, from at least to me, which is, do I trust Sammy Watkins? And I know we've asked this every week, but he continues to produce, so the questions continue to come. He scored a touchdown last week, but again, his targets seem to be on a side where his reception count isn't very high, but he tends to make a big play, whether it's a long play or a red zone play. Same mantra.
Pretty much. I mean, I still think he's snap to snap, series to series. The longer he goes without having an obvious setback, the better. But that doesn't mean he's at less risk this week than he was a couple of weeks ago. He is just continuing to play through this as he did toward the end of last year. This week, the Browns are a pretty good matchup. Whether that means more for LaShawn McCoy than the passing game is hard to know. I think Watkins remains kind of a high variance option for me. Maybe he converts on a longer play or something around the end zone. Maybe he doesn't, but he's not converting a high enough percentage of his tackles or of his targets rather, to have success.
And there we have it, not a poop fest, an information fest from Gene Bramall, Dr. Gene. Thank you so much. Be back with us Sunday morning, our Sunday morning hangout of the season, as holidays will be coming up. We always appreciate it. And, again, join with us this Sunday morning. Dr. Gene on Twitter, Second Opinion. We love you, Gene.
Yeah, I think it's going to be busy too. It's going to be talking about Jordan Reed and Randall Cobb and Julio Jones and AJ Green and, potentially Matt Forte and a whole host of others. So hopefully we'll have more matchup talk than injury talk. But until then, thanks, boys. We'll see you this weekend.
And the diggity doc is out. And instead it's Matt Walden with the hand grenade green hat and bloom here. Game for a second as we're watching the Poop Fest get down to the 1 yard line or 3 yard line here. Team, this is your adopted team, Matt.
Yeah, and I like good fantasy fertilizer. So I think good things grow from games like this. So anyway,
here's a question I have for you.
All right.
We've seen Seattle choppy up and down, like fits and starts, get it going for 3 or 4 games, and then often NFC West games. And then last year it felt sort of similar, but when they got to the playoffs, you could see as soon as the game started in Minnesota that they weren't the same. They won by a fluke. They went to Carolina, they almost that game, but still they came out and they just got flat. And I know this team is a slow starter in the playoffs, but it just didn't seem like they had the same verve last year in the playoffs that they had. Is the vibe you're getting from this team more like that team that comes together at the right time, or are they an also ran? And in the background here, if they're an also ran, who's the team running past them? Is it Atlanta? Is it Detroit? I mean, that's who's poised to knock them off. As in a season where in the NFC, I don't think there's a clear front runner. I want to go back to experience. And of course, that's Seattle Seahawks.
Yeah, I mean that's the tough thing, is that when you look at this particular incarnation of the Seahawks, they don't have Russell Okung. They don't have the center who I'm trying to remember his name, who plays for Thomas. Yeah, they don't have Earl Thomas. They don't have the center who they traded to the Saints. Yeah. So, and when you look at the way that this team is set up, the offensive line is weak by necessity. It's by design, because they didn't want to pay that kind of money so that they could keep their defensive players and Russell Wilson. So what you get is when they face teams with strong defensive tackles, they can't run, they can't protect the passer, and you see bad throws and mistakes, and that's the kind of thing that's going to happen here. And I think that it's just manifesting that what it shows you is that this is a talented team in certain quadrants of the roster, but it's not a complete talent, and it makes it a fascinating team. But from a matchup standpoint, when that offensive line is overmatched, you need magic from some of your players, and you're not getting it on a consistent enough basis. So yeah, I mean, Atlanta, but all these teams in the NFC are really incomplete teams if you think about it, because I mean, you look at Atlanta and their defense is not good. They don't have the ability to stop the pass. they're not great at stopping the run other than at least up the middle. They can be run up the middle. If you run side to side, those linebackers that are young are athletic enough to take them. But then you also have the injuries to Julio Jones, and you wonder if he's even going to be decent in the playoffs at this stage. And that means a good offensive line with a good running game and a good quarterback, but not much in terms of playmakers on the outside other than maybe Gabriel. So you have inexperience and youth and not a superstar on that. And then when you look at Green Bay, I mean, or excuse me, when you look at Detroit in this particular scenario, the defense is coming together. But again, once again, the team can't run the ball. Every team is like this. Dallas, to me, seems to me like if they get their quarterback situation straightened out now in the past couple of weeks, whether it's Prescott making improvements to some of the things that he's been exposed on, or whether they go with Romo and he can stay healthy and this team can open up the offense and be so good on offense and dominant that a bad defense doesn't matter. And I think that's what's going to happen in this particular conference is who has the greatest strength that can shore up their worst weakness. And I think that Dallas is probably that contender. Seattle obviously still is for certain game planning purposes, but I think Dallas is probably your best bet.
No. It is really all setting up. It really makes sense now. It's all setting up for the Giants and Eli Manning to run the table on the road again. It just makes sense, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they're playing
Detroit
this week. They may actually take the division from Dallas if Dallas loses to Tampa. Detroit, they still have the tiebreakers. It's still some time, but their defense is coming on. They got Odell Beckham. They got one of those players that can take over a game. Eli Manning just inexplicably. And look, this stuff becomes magical thinking, but magical thinking, the placebo effect is real. And I guarantee you that everybody on that Giants team feels like that. Like if we can just get to the playoffs and what this team has done in the past, and some of these players, Jason Pierre-Paul's probably out, maybe could come back at the end of the playoffs or something, but some of these players have been there. And they did it again with the Romeo Okwara. They find Pierre-Paul goes down, they find another pass rusher. The defensive additions they made have been looking better and better as the season has gone on. And I don't know, we'll see. We'll see how wide open the NFC bracket is. Something else I want to pick your brain about, Matt. And isn't it a Patriots move? Michael Floyd. And what's interesting here is, he's not cheap. He had that 5th-year option deal of like $7 million for the right to have Michael Floyd for the last 3 games and then the playoffs. They paid like a $1.2 million, not an insignificant sum of money. So this make you think about, and they've got Malcolm Mitchell, they've got Chris Hogan. I mean, is there a dossier with Floyd that they had him as like a AJ Green, Julio Jones level player? Is there something where they see him as not just a reclamation project, but somebody they can turn back into a number 1 receiver? Because that is very expensive for a 3-week plus the playoffs rental of a player who's been playing, frankly, not very good.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to say it's puzzling when it comes to the Patriots,
right?
But in the past, when we look at the one thing that they have a bad track record with, it has been wide receiver. They've been spotty at least. Randy Moss was a great success. Chad Johnson, not so much. Brandon Lloyd, not so much. Drafting wide receivers until this year, not so much. I mean, Julian Edelman is a quarterback they drafted to convert, and it worked out. But since Malcolm Mitchell is probably the best wide receiver that they have drafted since I can remember, since maybe Deion Branch, and Deion Branch was decent, but he wasn't a big time playmaker. So this could just be one of those scenarios that, they looked at what Floyd could be, and he was certainly a top prospect, but alcohol was an issue at Notre Dame. He had alcohol issues there, and that was one of the things that they feared about him, and in terms of his profile and how it was going to work out long term. And I didn't want to say this ever on the air during the year when we talked about him, because I didn't want to sit there and speculate that anything that I don't know. But now that we know that he passed out in front of the wheel, and that this has been kind of an issue with him still, and he's had some past issues with it, you have to have some concerns. But maybe they've done their due diligence, and maybe it was one of those deals where they knew Floyd was going to be gone anyway. He wasn't playing well. He didn't play along well with everybody else, and things just ended poorly in the locker room. And they just decided that it was best to give him a chance at a fresh start somewhere else. And maybe New England was like, we know something, and talked to the Cardinals organization and felt like that we have the resources in place, or the story that's there maybe isn't quite as, it looks bad in the public eye, but from a football standpoint, it may not be as bad as what they often deal with in the NFL in some of these extreme circumstances. So I can see why maybe they took that chance. But again, the only thing that I would say is that a lot of what Floyd has dealt with, in terms of dropping passes earlier in the year, at least, were really bad throws. I mean, when you look at some of those deep plays that he's had to make some plays that only Larry Fitzgerald can usually make. And you can't compare a player to that kind of standard all the time when he's open and then the ball's thrown and you have to make an incredible catch. But he has had some bad plays, later in the season here. And looking at it from that standpoint, I guess they're thinking that, maybe we can just give him a shot, and if it works out, we can get a good deal with him on a contract, and let's just see what we get. And maybe their cap situation was good enough based on what they had in the future that it was worth taking the risk to spend that kind of money for the reward that they could get. But on the hand, I'm puzzled. Yeah,
it is puzzling because Chandler Jones, they traded for a second-round pick because I think of the synthetic marijuana incident, at least contributed to that. They let Jamie Collins go so they could get a compensatory pick a year earlier because he wanted to be paid. It's just odd considering that. I mean, like you said, the one angle might be that they think they can get inroads to sign him before free agency at a discount, not let the market set his price. And what would the market even set his price at? So maybe he'll be inexpensive, but very curious, very odd. So you will not be joining us on Sunday morning because you're going to the Georgia Dome. And I did the Power Grid, the DFS show today, Matt. And one of the things they talked about, by the way, John Lee, Jeff Pasquino, football guy staffers going to the FanDuel Live Championship with $1 million first prize. So last year it was Devin Knotts and Austin Lee who made it to that. So
those guys are great, man. Those guys are great.
Yeah. Listen to John Lee. Listen to what he says. The dude, tip and pick. He knows what's up. So he talked about how, and there was a discussion point about this game, Matt, that Vegas is projecting Atlanta to score 32.5 points. If there's no Julio Jones, who's going to score those points? Who do we like out of the Falcons offense against? It's one of the few games with no weather issues. Obviously, the matchup is San Francisco. So who do we like in this game?
Yeah, well, I think that the way they're looking at this is probably two things, is that the defense is going to be able to stop the 49ers pretty well and have advantageous situations, which should lend well to the run game. So I think Devonta Freeman is probably your top play here, mainly because of what the run defense has given up for San Francisco over the weeks. But then you also have to look at Tevin Coleman, who I also have to say has improved with his running. He has become more patient. He's done a better job of cutting downhill. He's seen some of the zone plays better than I've seen him, especially this summer. So I'm definitely enthused by what I'm seeing there. And he's a good receiver out of the backfield, and they like to target him there. So I think both those guys are probably good plays. I think Devonta Freeman is still significantly a better option, but Coleman has a chance to have a big play and some decent yardage. And then you got to look at Taylor Gabriel. I mean, Gabriel is the best route runner on the team, and I would argue that he might even be as good of a route runner as Julio Jones. He's just not as great of an athlete as Jones. So I would look at that situation and like what I see from him, and understand too that they have some decent underneath options that can still complement Gabriel with the way that they play in this passing game. So you're going to see guys, if Sanu's not back, then you're looking at guys like Nick Williams, who's a practice practice squad call up who played well. He's a good route runner. He can run after the catch. He's where he's supposed to be. So they do well with him. And I think that what's most likely going to happen here is Gabriel's going to get the bulk of the options, and then you're going to see a three-way split between Aldrick Robinson, Nick Williams, and Justin Hardy. Yeah, and I would put it in that order. Honestly, it would probably be Robinson, Williams, and Hardy in that order. And the tight end play, you may get a big play here or there with a trick type of play, but don't look for consistent receiving yards in terms of volume. So that's how I see it. I think that 30. Now you're talking about 30 total for Atlanta, or
32.5. So, you look at the line, you look at the over-under, and you just do the math, and you say Vegas thinks Atlanta will score 32.5 points this week.
Yeah, I'm suspect of that one, but those guys seem to be pretty on point with what they do. So, the hypotheses of how that's laid out is how I did it, but I would be surprised if I would bet the under on that one, and think that maybe 24 is probably more realistic than 32.
So Jeff and John, again, going into that big final, they have to set that lineup. And the question here is, outside of maybe Kirk Cousins would be the only other unblemished quarterback this week, where you look at matchup, you look at the potential for weather. Now, the blemish on Matt Ryan is the potential for Julio Jones to be limited or out. But the question that went around, and I'm curious your thoughts on this question. I mean, we can cast it in DFS terms, but it's really just a football question, a fantasy football general question is, do you go with the chalk play, the obvious play of Matt Ryan? Do you pay up for Matt Ryan this week and avoid some of the things like Tom Brady against Denver, Andrew Luck with the shoulder thing we talked about, Drew Brees is cold, Carson Palmer is cold despite a good matchup, Ben Roethlisberger's on the road, Tom Brady, other players were just not. Do you really trust Joe Flacco in an important week? Cam Newton is banged up. Dak Prescott hasn't been doing it. You can go down the list. Every quarterback has a big question this week. Matt Ryan's question is pretty small because we saw him produce very well without Julio Jones against LA last week. So do you back Matt Ryan as the chalk play, or is your somewhat pessimism compared to Vegas expectations for the Atlanta offense mean you think DFS folks should look elsewhere?
No, I think he's going to be a good yardage play guy, and so that will probably work out well for you. I just don't know if he's going to be a multiple touchdown guy. I think that some of the rushing touchdowns will probably come there. So to me, it's really a situation of I don't have an easy answer for you. He could be that chalk play in terms of if you're going to play conservative, but if you can find, I think there are enough lineup combinations out there probably in terms of budget to performance with other positions where maybe you might find that it's worthwhile when you look at the whole situation overall, that you might find that why are you going to go against Tom Brady even against this good Broncos defense? Why would you go? They seem to out-scheme everybody, and he's such a good executor of that it's tough for me to look past him. I like the Flacco matchup, and I like how this offense is kind of running into form. I'm not worried about Roethlisberger. I know what happened. I'm not worried about him in the least. I was talking to my buddy.
So you're supposed to be like, is this is like when you told me Le'Veon Bell was a good draft pick. I'm listening. You've got my attention.
Yeah, I'm not worried about Ben. I mean, I know that
he was so terrible last week, Matt. There were like 3 plays he threw directly to Buffalo Bills, and there were 2 or 3 other plays where they dropped the ball, and he wasn't uncomfortable. He was throwing the ball like where he meant to throw it. They weren't throws where he was being hit or anything.
I think there was ice in his eyes or something. Yeah. I'm thinking that his eyeballs got frozen, just like Earl Thomas was talking about last week. About the Green Bay or Minnesota game last year, about how they're that kind of happened. I'm blaming it on something. I'm going to make an excuse for him, which I can't believe I'm doing, but I am. I just, part of it too is you look at Ladarius Green, and we can talk about him a little bit more. He's a man coverage guy, and he's not a zone coverage guy. And even as a man coverage guy right now, if his route doesn't break open right away, he needs Ben to direct him where to go, because he's new to this offense. He didn't get to practice with the team all that much. He's been injured all this time. And frankly, he's just not that. I would say, savvy of a football player as a route runner. Never was. He's very athletic. He can catch. That's great. But they know that the positives outweigh the negatives with him, that they can direct him where to go, and they'll deal with a misrun route or an issue here and there because they know that his threat to stretch the field at the tight end position far outweighs the other two tight ends in this group, and that makes him more dangerous to defenses, even if the other two guys are more reliable as route runners.
I'm glad you brought him up because Cincinnati historically does a good job shutting down Antonio Brown, in so much as you can shut down Antonio Brown, hold him to like 4 for 39. I think that was the line earlier this year. And I think they had a similar line on him one of the games last year. So Ladarius Green with the obvious play to pivot, other than giving Le'Veon Bell 38 carries again.
And I think that's the guy I'd pivot to be honest, because, nice big long pass to Tyler Lockett. That was pretty. There we go. But Tyler Lockett hasn't seen the end zone so much on a deep passing play. Didn't know quite what to do in that end zone. It looked like he had never been there before.
No dance. Yeah, no dance loaded up.
Yeah, but when we look at this, I am worried that since he does play a lot of zone and they do disguise their zones a little bit, and some of the things that they do, that I'd be a little concerned about Green, less so about Bell, less so about Eli Rogers if he's ready to go. If I'm not missing anything about his health or his availability, I could see how some of these guys, some of these supplementary receivers, do a little bit more of the work than Green in this scenario, whereas Green maybe occupies the zone a little bit more than opposed to actually making big plays on it.
So you expressed some confidence in Tom Brady at Denver. I think the record that Cecil was quoting was 2-7. I don't know if that's exactly accurate, but it sounds about right. That Brady has trouble in Denver, and that's when he's not facing. Well, last year we saw what happened in the AFC title game. But if you see in the crystal ball success for Tom Brady, who's on the other end of those passes?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that probably who's on the other end of those passes is going to be. I think Edelman will probably be on the other end of those passes. I think some Malcolm Mitchell will be. But I think it's going to be the backs. I think it's going to be White and Lewis, who, again, and it's because these linebackers can't cover all that well. And what you're going to see is Denver can be run on. And I think Blunt's going to be able to run on them. And when we look at some of the past incarnations, the Broncos were tougher to run against in the past. They're a little easier now. And I think that that's going to create that balance bind that makes Brady such a tough play, because if they can run, then there's lots of things that this offense can do that's gonna put these defenses in situations where they're like, we know this is coming, but we have to honor X, and we're gonna get beat, and it's gonna frustrate the heck out of us as he dinks and dunks his way down the field on us, because we have to account for the fact that we couldn't stop the run. And if they win, I can imagine in an interview that there's going to be some safeties like TJ Ward being really ticked off, going, we couldn't stop the run. We have to stop the run. And everybody's but they're like, but you got thrown on. And he's like, that's exactly my point.
Yeah.
He said if we could stop the run, we wouldn't get thrown on. But that's the way I look at it. Is it's probably going to be the backs. You may see, like what Gene said, it's a blown coverage opportunity. To me, the tough thing is forecasting who the receivers are going to be this week, because Denver's man coverage defense is so tough. But to me, that means, well, who are the man coverage guys that tend to win? It's blown assignment guys who win. Hogan, Edelman, maybe a little bit, Bennett, and then underneath, it's those underneath players. So that's where I'm looking.
And then you mentioned the running game, LeGarrette Blount. And we've seen this year, Jeremy Hill, 17 for 97 and 2 touchdowns. Devontae Freeman had 23 for 88 and a touchdown. Kevin Coleman in that game, you mentioned the backs, 4 for 132 and a touchdown as a receiver against Denver. And Kyle Shanahan, I think, doing some of the same idea of forming an offensive game plan each week to match up your strengths against their weaknesses. We also saw Latavius Murray have 114 and 3 touchdowns back in week 9. And then last week, DeMarco Murray 21 for 92 and a touchdown. So it really does look like a LeGarrette Blount week. Just a couple more minutes before we sign off here. This one is the poop fest is starting to swirl in the drain. Richard Sherman, dude gives every year. He gives us gold. He just gives us gold. No, I mean, when it's coming from a player,
yeah,
I feel like, Matt, when a player says it, then we're allowed to say it.
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah. But this Arizona, so again, maybe I'm just thinking in DFS terms because I just hosted the show earlier tonight. But one of the things, and you can think about this when you're setting your lineups too, though, with weather playing such a big role, we have an indoor game down in Arizona. We have two quarterbacks who are very bold, very aggressive passers, offenses that can be very bold. And at least one of the things that I do when I'm doing projections and rankings every week is think about what the game script's going to be and the way that the teams are going to play off of each other. So, for instance, Tennessee and Kansas City, Dallas and Tampa Bay, those feel like wrestling matches. Those feel like games that neither team's going to try to do anything too cute or too risky. You're going to put it in the hands of the defense in the running game. You hope for a turnover. You play field position. You hope to stay in like third and short and do high percentage passing. Arizona, New Orleans at least has on its face one of those games that could become a 38-35 kind of shootout. However, Carson Palmer was just terrible in the slop. And it isn't like we could say it was a slop because Ryan Tannehill was great before he got hurt in that game, which then says, well, who was the pass defense? Arizona. Drew Brees can take advantage of that. Drew Brees has 0 touchdowns and 5 interceptions, I think, in the last 2 weeks. Six interceptions. I'm sorry. The stat that went around, I forget who was, that Willie Snead was the last Saint to throw a touchdown pass. So when we start to think about this, we're looking for upside. J.J. Nelson, Willie Snead, Michael Thomas, who we talked about with Dr. Gene, Brandon Cooks. Do you see this one? Games, the candidates to get high scoring would be maybe Oakland and San Diego. You look across the board, though, and it seems like this is going to be another ugly fantasy week. And in an ugly fantasy week, if one of these games gets up to 60, 70 points, that can tilt a lot of matchups. Will Arizona and New Orleans be that game?
Yeah, it's one of those. It's so funny because this is where your mettle gets tested as a fantasy owner, because you look at these two players and it's like this is the story we hear over and over again every year from some owners, which is I just gave up on player X, and then he just goes off on that 1 week and has like a 40-point game. This is the kind of week where I look at Drew Brees and watch the game, and yeah, there was a play. There were 3 plays where Keith Tandy read his eyes, and he didn't recognize one coverage, but I think he was forcing to try and make some things happen later on in the game. He made some beautiful throws in that game still. He's still good in the pocket. I would have no problem going down with the ship with Drew Brees, knowing that I had a chance at a 3 or 4 touchdown day from him, because his receivers are healthy enough. They're not going to be able to run against Arizona, I don't think. Not as well, I think, as they'll be able to throw, especially if Matthew's still out. Is Matthew still supposed to be out?
I don't know if he's going to be out, but I mean, Deion Buchanan's out, Tyvon Branch is out now,
Yeah.
and Matthew, I think, would be limited. I mean, not his normal self. So again, Miami Tannehill had 3 touchdown passes before he left that game. So
now Palmer, I'm more worried about because who's he throwing to, and he can't get protection. And that's the biggest issue with him, is that watching these glow sticks moving around is kind of
I love the Bennett brothers.
Distracting.
Yeah,
when Michael Bennett's doing pelvic thrusts in bright green clothes, it's enough to make Gene Bramwell
like
cry
those things
on air.
outside of the sale, like the used car lot, like the big glow stick that like bends in the wind with the arms,
Dude, I am so going to Instagram this, and we are going to play this for Gene and see if he can keep his water with that going on, because man, I was having a tough time there. When you see Palmer last week, the ball was wet and there were some issues there, but really most of it was he was throwing high because he was having guys bearing down on him. And when Larry Fitzgerald couldn't reach some of the throws that you're targeting him with, there's a problem. So I think that the one thing that the Saints do pretty well is that when they do blitz, they blitz effectively. Donnell Ellerby's been kind of a nice play off the edge as a linebacker, used kind of as that Sam kind of look to come off the edge and go after people. So I think it's going to be tough for Palmer. While I think maybe there's a 15% chance he can have a 300-yard day because the Saints can make some mistakes, I think I'd much more go with Brees And then I feel kind of the same way. Oh, well, my God, it was a cross body block on Gurley there that was vicious, and Bennett is really hurt. But looking at the other game, I think Phillip Rivers is the start. Carr, I worry about. I just don't know if that finger's kind of like him having to almost cancel his workout back in pre-draft days because he got the flu. I mean, I don't know about him in terms of like when the chips are down. I'm a little worried about him at this stage. I would say that Rivers is probably the better play. So is Breeze. I worry more about Palmer and Carr.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, and we'll miss you on Sunday morning, but have fun at the game. And the watch Atlanta, maybe in the season to remember, as we detailed how the NFC bracket is wide open, and I'm sure I'll pick your brain about the AFC bracket too. Watch out for those Steelers. You're making me feel, you're giving me that feeling when the way you said you're not worried about Roethlisberger. We're a little worried about Michael Bennett, as we saw. It was kind of like that Rocky like double knockout with him and Todd Gurley on that play, but
yeah.
We're watching, Tyler Lockett coming through, Matt Harmon, right on. Russell Wilson.
I think he's some little Bulldogs right now.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That's exactly what he's seeing. And Russell Wilson coming through. If you trusted him after his worst, last week was the worst game of Russell Wilson's career. Yes, I mean not even close.
Yeah. But I'll say this: last game was the worst stats of his career. The Green Bay first 3 quarters of the Green Bay game in the NFC Championship was the worst game of his career.
They won.
Yes, because this one was that one. I mean, Jimmy Graham. I mean, they're all but maybe 2 interceptions were his fault, and one of them was a throw he normally makes. And then the other 3 were just odd situations. So I wouldn't necessarily say it was all on him, but
no,
he seems to be his production's at its worst against the Packers. It's been rough. I think it's called karma for them stealing that game on Monday night during his rookie year.
That's fair. We appreciate everybody joining us here on Thursday nights. Cecil will be on assignment. I'll also be back next week. Cecil will be on assignment on our last Thursday hangout of the year. Hope everybody advances in the semis. Football guys sending out all of our good vibes to Jeff Pasquino, John Lee. Win. And I hope you win so we can talk about our finals matchups. And everybody have yourself a great week 15. Remember, we have a Saturday night game, Saturday Night Fever, the Jets and the Dolphins. So enjoy that. We always enjoy you. We enjoy spending this time with you because you always stay classy.